Hello friends, and today we are going to learn about Magento ORM. I have collected a couple of pointers that will be really very useful for the exams perspective, and we will be discussing them first, and then we will be going into the code and how Magento's ORM is actually working. So first thing to note that is object oriented programming generally uses a ORM to interact with a database and perform these type of operations. Nowadays you don't directly allow and clients to fire queries to database, and you use a ORM to perform these tasks, and the end clients that are like controller files or model files or our web APIs are allowed to trigger these functions of ORM, and then internal functioning will be handled by ORM only. So this is quite secure and reliable functionality, and it enhances first thing security, and the second thing is persistency and reliability. Next thing is, as the name indicates here, ORM is object relational mapping. So whenever you have a relational database, let's say you have a users table and you have two columns, name, the first name and the last name. So when you query the database, you get these two columns, and these two columns name, if you get them as a property of a class, where you extend some class, and inside that you can use an arrow and then write first name, by which you can access the first name property. This is something what can be achieved by ORM. So it's actually a technique used to persist objects from an object oriented language. PHP is an object oriented language, to the relational databases. uh, in your database table, assume columns as the objects that will be finally resulting. So ORM picks the column values and results them into the objects or the properties of the object for that particular table. In Magento, ORM is built around actually three things: models, resource models, and collections or resource collections. So whenever you are going to create a module, you will be creating a folder for models, and inside the model folder we have subfolder for resource model, and inside that we have a model for collections. I'll just show you after this slide, but Magento's ORM actually consists these three type of functionality. And then first thing to understand is models are actually data and behavior representing entities. So whenever you have a customer entity in your database, you will create a model that will represent its data and behavior, whereas the resource model for customer entity will be used for performing database related operations. So we call them a data mappers. But the collections are actually encapsulates group of models, let's say. They are used for encapsulating models, so the final output can be retrieved. When you query a database, you can retrieve multiple rows that are the collections. Okay, and then sometimes you can hear only this term, which is resources, that are include database connection via adapter. So I'll show you that how Magento defines connections, but that will be, I think, your homework for today's lecture. But I'll show you this around in Magento's code. Now, other thing to note is model encapsulates storage independent business logic. Okay, so anything that is related to database will only be included into resource models, whereas anything related to business logics will be in our models. And strictly models are restricted not to use or create any function that relates to database. Then resource model encapsulates storage related logics as discussed, and all storage layer related actions are the responsibility of resource model. Okay, that's clear. Next thing is resource model uses DB adapter to access the storage. Okay, so DB adapters, I think you should be clear about this. They are the connection to the database. You create a file named as adapter that creates a connection. Whenever you're going to perform a database query, you use DB adapter to automatically create that connection for you and use that connection further. And sometimes DB adapters can be used for persistence connection, but that is not a part of this lecture. Okay, and it populates the model with the data from the database. So whenever a model is called, it will internally call a resource model, and then resource model will fetch the data from database, and then it will push things into the models object, so that the end clients can call the functions or the objects or the properties of model to get the needed details. Okay, and benefit of resource models are actually decoupling of business logic and the storage layer. So your storage layer is actually secure. You have a limited amount of functions that can be performed in database, so they are secure in separate layer, but the business logic can change in Magento's upgraded versions as well. So decoupling of these two is performed by actually resource model. Decoupling of storage schema from DB driver implementation, a design pattern known as data mapper. So well, this line actually is going to come directly in exam if you are lucky. I have seen this in I have a couple of friends who told me that exactly this wording was in the exam. Decoupling of the storage schema. Okay, so decoupling, storage schema from the DB driver implementation. Magento has an implementation for database driver, and that database driver implementation is completely abstract. You cannot know how Magento is implementing or connecting to the database and getting the details, and this is completely decoupled using the resource models only. So you worry about models and the resource models, and inside the resource model whatever is going to be done, Magento will handle that. Inside the resource model means resource model will be extending certain class, and that will be abstracted into that particular class. Resource collection represents a list of models of a specific type. This approach is used for working with multiple records. So I think this should be clear. Collections are the thing that we are going to work extensively in Magento. Let me directly show you what we are actually talking here, but these are the pointers. I'll also push them in some description or somewhere else, but I'll recommend you to keep checking these. And let's go to the code. I have opened my folder for our Magento. I was in module CMS, and then okay, let me go to again module CMS, and here we have Magento CMS module, which is responsible for CMS pages and static blocks. Now in this module we have models, okay, and we will see the block.php. This is a model created by Magento's core. So you don't worry about this, just know that this extend model always extend this Magento class abstract model. Okay, this is really very important because we will see how these classes are internally working. But whenever you're going to define a model in your module, one thing you should know that you will be defining one construct function. Okay, and in this construct function you will be passing the name of the resource model for particular model. So we have a block model, and we are passing here, Magento is passing here the resource model for this particular block model. So there must be a resource model folder inside this, and we have a block.php that is passed inside the underscore constructs init function. Now if you go to this file which I just opened, again just note that what you are extending here, and then in here you will also have a construct function that has a init function in which you will pass the CMS block and the block ID, which is the primary key of the database or the unique identifier of the database, and the table. Now when you have these two simultaneously, you must have a collection for these two to be implemented. For example, let me go to block again. Inside resource model we open this block.php, and inside resource model we will have a folder for block, and here the collection file will be available for the general Magento structure. So as we discussed that models, which is block.php, again resource model, which is again block.php, but inside resource model folder, and inside the resource model block folder we have the collection.php. The combination of these three is the ORM for our CMS page, CMS block module in Magento. Okay, now in collection again we will be checking that what is actually they are extending, but first thing to consider here is the underscore construct function, and we will see that in the init function you will pass the model, okay, which was our first file here, and then the resource model. So as discussed in the slide, the models are actually the business logic related layer. It don't have anything that relates to database. So for accessing database, in the underscore construct we are calling an init function where we are passing the resource model, which will eventually handle the database connections and other things. Now if we go to resource model underscore and its underscore construct function, we are by this function only you can see that there must be something happening related to database, because you are passing the primary key of a table, you are passing the table name. So internally Magento is using the database operation in here only, but whenever you're going to access the collections, okay, in your code you are capable to call the model separately, and you are capable to call the collection separately. We will be creating factory classes for them. Okay, so when you create a models factory, you will be able to access the default functionality, but when you will be calling the collection factory, you will be able to perform various other operations like get list or filter or sorting. So these will be performed using collections. So collections has a separate importance in here. In collection you will see that its construct function passes the model and resource model's name. So collections are actually handling the database related thing using resource model, and then binding everything using the model. So they are the combination of these two, and the final output is the collection of models, you can say. Okay, now one thing to note here is, I'll go to the resource model. The underscore construct function here is the single underscore construct function, which should never be confused against the Magento's default, PHP's default underscore construct function. Okay, and to understand this deeper, first I'll go to block, and we see that we are extending the abstract model here. I'll go to Magento framework model and abstract model. I'll go to Magento framework model and the abstract model .php file, and in our underscore construct function, which is protected, we call the init function. So I'll search for this init here. Okay, here you can see that in the abstract layer of the model we have an init function that asks us to define the resource model. So you calling the init function, you passing the resource model. Now let's go to the resource model. Resource model, we'll see that what it's extending. It's extending Magento framework model, resource model, DB, and abstract DB. So models, and then we have the resource model, and then we have the DB, and then we had abstract DB class. And again we'll go to init. Okay, so in this init function you can see that set main table function, which accepts the main table name and the field name that needs to be remembered for Magento. Okay, and one more thing is to, okay, let's go to the topic again. I just visualize something, but let's not consider that for now. So in your resource model, what you passed was the table name and the primary key. So here Magento is setting what will be your main table. So whenever you're going to perform a model query, and after that you print the query, you will see that it will be pushing out the table name as main table, because Magento is setting that as main table here. Okay, so when you call the Magento, it set your main table, so your connections are everything created, your model is loaded. When you call the resource model, your connection is created automatically by resource model, and then your main table is set, and you're good to go to fetch the database data here. Now if you see the collection apologies, if you see the collection, in resource model we have abstract collection class. So I'll go back. In resource model we have abstract collection class, and again we'll go to the init function, where it's init. What happened? I opened the wrong file. Abstract resource, I opened this. Okay, abstract connection should be open. I opened abstract resource, my bad. In models, and then resource model, and then we have, sorry, let me go again, Magento CMS model, and then resource model, and then abstract collection. Magento framework model, then we have the resource model, and then we have abstract collections. So I'll pause the video here, give me a second, let me find the file for you. Okay, I open that file, abstract collection.php, and if you can see that in model, resource model, we have abstract collection. Earlier I was in Magento framework folder. Let me show you module and CMS. We have model, and then resource model, and then abstract collection.php. Okay, my bad. Now next thing, we're going to go to the init function. Where is it? Do we have a init? In collection we are calling it underscore construct. In abstract we have this underscore construct here. Okay, so in the collections are actually extending this abstract collection class, which further extend this class. Inside it we should have init somewhere. It's protected, PRODC. Yep. Okay, this is the protected init function. So in your collection, what you have done is you have passed the model, and then you pass the resource model. So here Magento, when you pass the model and resource model, Magento sets the model and sets the resource model using Magento's getters and setters. And when you are going to finally create a factory for abstract class, you will have everything set up in background to directly access the database. Collections are actually going to have various functions like sorting and other functions that we will be discussing when we are going to create a model in our separate lecture. And so what you are actually doing here is you're creating a model to work with your business logics, you're creating a resource model to work with the database and setting things here, and then collections where you are setting the model and resource model. In the blocks, I just wanted to mention something, but I missed. Let me see. Well, what's that? Okay, let me see. It's the main table function or something. In your model we have this, and in your constructor you have passed this, and then in your model you have passed the get resource model, and then in your resource model you have passed these two things, and then so when you call the resource model, the init function is actually internally using set main table function, and I think there is there is something in the set main table by which you can pass the third parameter, in which you can specify if the primary key is something different. So for instance, you have this model, you can pass the CMS block here and then the primary key, and in case needed you can pass a third parameter for certain cases. I'll check it and will let you know in further lecture. I can find what exactly the concept was. For this lecture, just understand that model, resource model, and the collection, the combination of these three are the ORM. Whenever you're going to perform any action related to database, you will be working with these three. And in our module, we will be frequently creating them. We will be using install and upgrade schema for creating our tables, and then the models to accessing the data, and to create the grids and various other functioning. So that was all for this lecture. See you soon. Bye.